IPMNation.com.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Dr. John Rich, and you've tuned in to Dr. John's Neighborhood. The show is going well. I'm still enjoying myself. I hope you're enjoying being one of my listeners. I want to just give a little quick promo. You can reach me at info@drjohnrich.com. That's connected to my website at drjohnrich.com. I'm always available to you if you want to talk about the show, you want to be a guest on the show, you want to make a suggestion about being on the guest. I have an upcoming guest, hasn't been scheduled yet, but if anybody out there is a Survivor fan, you may remember a character on Survivor named Rupert. And Rupert has started a charity called Rupert's Kids, and he's going to be on the show in one of the next couple weeks. So that's going to be pretty interesting. And if you're having some issues, you're looking for somebody to give you a little bit of counseling or just a listening ear, you can send me an email about that as well. So we'll jump right into our interview for the evening. I have on the line Deanne Barrett. She describes herself as a life coach for parents of teens. Can you say hello, Deanne?
Hi, everybody.
I keep wanting to call you Diane, and it's Deanne.
It is.
Yeah, so I should stop doing that. So I want to jump right in and start talking about your title. I asked you how you wanted me to introduce you, and you said you wanted to be called a life coach. And you said that you purposely call yourself a life coach as opposed to a parent coach. So I'm intrigued to know why you make that distinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I really, look at other parenting coaches, when I started working with parents myself, I realized that there was a big disconnect between what they were looking for and what I had to offer them. And then I started looking around at other parenting coaches, because that's what I was calling myself at the time. Yeah. And I realized that a lot of parenting coaches will talk about strategies for how to manage your child's behavior, or strategies for how to get through the chore wars, or how to help your kids navigate the social world. And I use strategies as well, so I don't want to give the impression that that's not important. But all of the strategies that we use are built on the foundation of who we are, what we believe, what we value.
Okay.
And so when I describe myself as a life coach for parents who have teens, we really go deep into that territory, because often the kind of strategy that we feel like we could use is built on the foundation of what we believe and who we are. And especially when it comes to raising teenagers, that's when a lot of our fear and worry bubbles up, because we know we need to start letting them go and be more independent, but it's such a struggle to know how to do that well and how to do that carefully. So a lot of it is understanding our emotional responses to what's happening in our family life that is so important when I'm working with parents who have teenagers.
So, what's coming to mind, and I don't know how much this resonates with what you're trying to say, but what's coming to mind is that the majority of parents, when they find themselves in a situation where all of a sudden they have to be a parent, are all too... it's too easy to just start parenting exactly the same way they were brought up. And a lot of times when I talk with people who are starting to reflect on the upbringing that they experienced, there's a disconnect between how their parents did it and how they want to do it, but they can't quite put their finger on it. So they know that they were spanked when they were brought up, but they feel like spanking is inconsistent with the kinds of messages they want to send to their children, and yet they're without the strategies So there's the integration of the values and the strategies, or without the strategies to respond in any other way because it hasn't been modeled for them. Does that connect at all with what you're trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about, here's an example from my own life. So many years ago, I started as a high school teacher, and I was advocating for gay and lesbian students because they really were suffering from not having a safe place to really even talk about that part of their identity that they were trying to understand. It wasn't necessarily safe to talk about it at home. And so in schools, we were starting to create safe places where students could come to understand who they are and find a safe place to explore that. Mm-hmm. So I was sharing that with my parents, this work that I was really excited about doing. And they said, there weren't that many gay kids when we went to school. And I was like, okay. But then when they thought about it, they remembered.
Right.
Oh, there was this person. Oh, now there's this person.
Yeah.
But those examples of people who would identify as gay or lesbian didn't come to them until they remembered maybe their 25-year anniversary, where those people finally felt safe enough, comfortable enough, experienced enough in their own life that they could share that part of their personality openly with their classmates 25 years down the road. So it was that realization from my parents' perspective that, this thing that now seems to be out in the open in terms of some area where we can support young people, it actually existed back then.
Right.
We just didn't have the tools, the capacity to be able to address it like we do now. And I think that's the situation that we find ourselves, that gap of, okay, there's a lot more things out in the open, on the table right now that we just didn't have to handle with our parents in our own upbringing.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with parents, do you start the conversation by asking them to talk about their values as a parent, or the values that they want to instill in their children, or the kinds of characteristics that they're trying to model for them? Is that the starting place?
It is. And I'll walk you through kind of the first few questions. So when people start a conversation with me because they know the work that I do and they're reaching out for some support with raising their teenager, the first question I ask is, what brought you to connect with me? And usually there's a problem that's arisen that they just feel like they need some more support to handle that.
Yeah.
And so what I ask is, how do you want to show up for your teen? And that takes so many people off guard because they just want to tell me all the problems that they see. Right. My teenager's not going to school, or my teenager will get up and leave the room when I come into the room. So their focus is so much on the issue they see with their teenager.
Yeah.
And so when I ask, well, how would you like to be in relation to that? Often there's silence. Like, I don't even know.
Uh-huh.
And that's what we need to ask ourselves is, in the face of this behavior, how do I need to show up?
Yeah.
Well, do I need to show up as a listening ear, compassionate? Do I need to, and that's a moment when parents can reflect on how they've come into this relationship with their teen, because it is about both of them and more people. It's about the family system altogether. Yeah. But the only thing the parent can change is themselves and what's happening. And when they can change their experience, that's when their teenager can shift in response to that.
Well, and what's interesting about what you do is it's a basic tenet of therapy that when a person comes to a therapeutic situation with a specific concrete thing that they want help on, it turns out that specific concrete thing is just a symbol for something much bigger. That it's that the problems we're having in our relationships with other people, whether it be a spouse or our kids or our parents or whoever it might be, that those are not really about the concrete problem at hand. They're philosophical questions about how to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
So Can you give us an example? Can you think of a really good example without giving away any confidentiality of a person who had a concrete situation? They came to you for some help, and how was that actually related to a much broader conversation about how to parent or how to just be a person in the face of that dilemma?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I'll tell you about my client, Sarah. That's not her real name, but that's the name that I'll use for her.
Sure.
And like most of the moms that I work with, Sarah is lovely. You know, she cares deeply about her children. She puts a lot of effort into her parenting. She's shifted her work schedule so she can be more available to her kids. And, you know, does all of those things that we know how to do. And yet she came to me because she had a 13-year-old daughter who would leave the room as soon as she came into the room. And she was hurt and baffled about why this was happening. And she knew that she needed to shift this because at 13, she knows that she wants to have a solid relationship with her daughter so that when her daughter is going through the turbulence of adolescence and starting to make bigger decisions, she wanted to have a close connection with her so she could help her through all of that.
Well, it sounds like her daughter might be upset about something that the mom said or did, and it's just an unresolved conflict there. Is that why she's leaving the room? Let me just jump ahead and try to guess.
Yeah, so, I mean, you might think, oh, it's one big thing, but it actually often is a series of much smaller things.
Yeah.
And so really what was at the heart of this was this 13-year-old just continually felt her mother's disapproval. And it's all of those things that we want to, you know, support our kids. She wanted her to, you know, eat more vegetables and get more physical exercise. Right. And mom was worried about her health and wanting to support her. But all of that came to be this energy of disapproval, and her daughter just could not bear to be around that.
Yeah.
And so over time, being able to shift the way that this mom approached her daughter in the smallest ways. We started with gratitude, really looking at what are you grateful for about this girl who is your daughter, and really coming from that place, and then really making some strong distinctions about, okay, what's most important? Is it her eating her vegetables right now, or is it connecting and having this relationship be more life-giving to both of you? And when she could really clarify where she was in this and make the connecting points happen with her daughter, then some of the disapproval melted away because she was able to be more intentionally focused on connecting and finding the things that are working.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about my children and their academics and how I feel like they can achieve anything that they want to achieve. And so if they bring home a grade that might not be at the tippity top, there's an inclination that I have to maybe say, you know, well, it sounds like you need to study harder or something. And then I recognize that can come across the wrong way. So I tend to just ask them how you feel about that grade. And I do find that if it is a little bit lower than that, they know that it's not quite up to their own par. And then I can have a conversation and ask them, well, so, you know, what do you think you could have done to get a better grade? Or what's your plan? And giving that over to them to be able to think through their own plans for self-improvement.
I love that. And that is such a powerful example, because I love the phrase you used of giving that over to them. What a great image, because adolescents need that experience of being able to evaluate their own internal expectations and understand if they're meeting those, and then knowing they can do something to change it. So you asking that question, what would you do differently, empowers them to be able to do that heavy lifting, that thinking about what would they do in this next round of school? What would they do to make that improvement?
Yeah. And then I would also say that the backbone of your child being able to do that is when they see that you're doing it too. So you come home and you say, well, I just tried to do X, Y, and Z, and it went okay, but I could have done better, or I could have prepared more, or I wish I had asked it a different way. Just showing them that you recognize that there's room for improvement, and that doesn't have to be a slight against your entire self-worth.
Yeah. And recognizing that we can hold those things in tension. Often it's a struggle, feeling like, how can I really feel worthy as a person and know that I still have room to improve?
Yeah.
And often we get one without the other. And especially when parents feel like, my teenager is so narcissistic, they're, so self-absorbed, that can be a really adaptive situation for teens to be, because they are working on developing their self-worth and feeling like they have something worthwhile to offer, when they are painfully reminded every day that they're only a teenager, they're not yet an adult, they're not yet contributing to society. That's often the message that teens get, whether it's intended or just implied. That's often the feeling that they get. So the more we can do as adults to help them recognize that both are true. You can be completely loving of yourself and accepting of your beautifully imperfect self, and know that you have room to improve and grow, and that we all do in every stage of our lives.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about the fact that I think a lot of parents, when they look back at themselves as teenagers, that they see a lot of things that they did wrong. Like I think about, I smoked a lot of weed when I was in school. I did not achieve my potential. My grade point average was awful when I graduated from high school. And so now I don't want my kids to make those same mistakes. And yet at the same time, I don't feel like it would be very right of me to judge them if they make mistakes that are similar to the ones that I made. So where is that line between recognizing that your teenager might look a lot like you did when you were a teenager, and yet not being hypocritical about judging them for those behaviors?
What a great example. And I just appreciate your honesty about smoking a lot of weed, because when we look back on that, our tendency is to want to prevent our children from making our same mistakes.
Right.
But they will make mistakes, and they may be the same ones we made or different ones that we made. And really, if we can keep our mind focused on those discussions like you just described, how do you feel about that? What would you do differently in that? That is the sweet spot of parenting. And it's continually coming back to that, because you used the iceberg analogy before we started recording, but it's like our teenagers are an iceberg, and the best we can do is to have those conversations. And we don't always know all the things that have happened to our teenagers, all of the thoughts they have about themselves in relation to their peers, in relation to their family. There's a whole lot going on under the surface. And when we're not with them, that will lead them to making decisions that we may or may not feel like are the best ones.
Right.
And that even 5-10 minutes later, they may realize we're not the best decisions. But the best we can do is to stay with them and continue to ask them those questions. How do you feel about what's happening? What can we do together as the next step towards what you really want? And how can I support you through this, no matter what it is? I last year spent some time in a high school, specifically for mothers, teenage mothers. And every one of them, I was talking to them about resilience. And the thing that surprised all of those young women was that resilience didn't mean that they just had to like suck it up and push through and pick themselves up repeatedly.
Yeah.
It was that part of resilience is having the support of people around them.
Uh-huh.
And it was amazing to me that was new to them, because they had done that in their own way in their lives, surrounded themselves with support. One of the pieces of support was that they were at a school specifically tailored to their needs. But when we know that is one of the key points of resilience, is having the support of people around us, that can help parents to really take heart and know you can't choose the path of which failures your kid is going to choose.
Uh-huh.
But what you can do is choose how you're going to respond to whatever decisions they've made.
But isn't it frustrating that, you can be 40, 50 years old, and now you can look back on your life and recognize what the correct path might have looked like? Of course, it's all, hindsight. And then here's your teenage son or daughter talking to you like you don't know anything. That can be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And here's the thing, too, that really gets frustrating is, as adults, we've chosen a certain path. We've handled whatever failures. You clearly have become successful by all, outward standards, being a doctor and a psychologist, even though you smoked weed and didn't have a great GPA.
Right.
You have found your way through that.
Yeah.
And then our teenagers come into our lives and they can blindside us with kinds of problems that we avoided intentionally. And then we're thrown into the vulnerability of adolescence, of trying to support them through things that we didn't want to ever have to deal with.
Yeah.
And that can lead down some paths of resentment, frustration, but it can also be an opportunity to really deepen our understanding of who we are and what we can handle, and really allow us to really practice what we might believe kind of theoretically about family, about the resources we have, about who are our true friends that will stand by us through anything.
Yeah.
And all of that can come into a different kind of focus when our teenagers are making decisions that are different than the ones we've made.
Yeah, it really does drag up some of your old stuff.
Absolutely.
When the kids are little, you can just tell them what to do, or you can give them directives. Yeah. And if you've developed a good relationship, they tend to respect your point of view. But now you're running into a situation where this gradual letting go and recognizing that they're going to make mistakes, and then you need to be there to help pick them up so that they can keep moving forward. It's just a lot fuzzier.
Yeah.
Let me ask you.
And what I often like to say is that teenagers are the experts in their own life. Uh-huh. They've got access to way more of that iceberg than we do.
Yeah.
And so if we can really see it as a partnership,
yeah,
then we're on a good track, because they can be the expert in their own life. And if we can find ways to come alongside them and help them get what they want,
yeah,
then they really will be more open to hearing what we have to say.
Yeah. Now, one of the go-to things that I say to my teenage boys now, that it wasn't a plan, it just came out, and I think that it's had some resonance, is maybe I'll say something and they'll act annoyed that I said it, or I'll offer some advice and they'll respond like I don't know what I'm talking about. And then I would say, okay, well, do whatever it is you need to do. If you need to talk to me about it, that's perfectly fine. But I just want you to remember that I'm on your side. I'm on your side. Like, even if you think that I don't know what I'm talking about, or that my perspective doesn't capture everything that you're trying to figure out, I'm on your side more than almost everybody else that you know. So come to me when you need it. And they usually say something like, I know. Yeah, they know. So let me ask, at the risk of maybe crossing a boundary here or whatever, like I talked about something in my life that the smoking weed, like I was literally smoking weed every single day before school and after school. And that's like in response to a number of family traumas that were happening at that time. By all accounts, if you looked at me from the outside, as I'm sure a lot of my high school friends did and my teachers did, you gotta believe that I was going to end up being a failure. So what about your life going back in time? Like, where were some crisis points for you where you made a decision or two that might have really ended up being tragic? Is there something that you can look back on in your own life that it turned out okay, but at the time it probably wasn't the wisest way to go?
That just automatically took me back to when I was dating the man who turned out to be my husband. So there's the happy ending. You can rest assured there's a happy ending.
Yeah.
But probably, I want to say maybe our second or third date.
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't met any of my friends. I hadn't met any of his. So we didn't have any of those like social, checks and balances. And he had a rental car and we went for a drive in like through the countryside. And it was dark. And I had this moment of like, wow, this is maybe not the smartest move I've ever made.
Yeah.
I'm out in the dark with this guy who, like, none of my friends have met. No one knows what he looks like. Like, this could be the end of me.
Yeah.
But I trusted myself so much to trust my intuition. But in that moment, I had that moment of fear, like, oh my gosh, like I maybe should not be so trusting of myself because I'm kind of on this euphoric, like falling in love high.
Yeah.
And it turned out well. And here we are many years later. But in the moment,
if he had turned out to be a different person.
I'm in the middle of this now. How do I get out if I need to?
Yeah. And then if your own daughter was thinking about doing that, you'd be like, you cannot put yourself in that situation. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, do you want some advice? No, that's not a good thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that becomes a very tricky point of how do we help our children to trust their intuition when we don't know if they can trust their intuition, and what even is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's keep thinking about Deanne when she was younger. What I talked to you about before the show about, I really like to do this in the interviews, to reflect back into your childhood and your teenage years. Are there things that come to mind that make sense of this path that you've taken as a life coach? Are there people that you met who acted like a life coach for you that ended up later on to be the inspiration for why you made the decision to go into this field, or other experiences that kind of, again, put some context around how you ended up becoming this person that you are today?
What a great question. Well, the more I reflect on my childhood and now having children of my own and seeing my parents as grandparents, it's just such an incredible gift because I was blessed to be raised by parents who dearly loved me and my brother and gave us all sorts of opportunities to experience the world but also understand ourselves. And so, for example, I'm here in Canada, very close to the Rocky Mountains, and for 2 weeks out of every summer, we would go to the woods and camp, just our family. So no technology, no friends, no video games, just us, the mountain stream, our mountain bikes, and some good books. Mm-hmm. And that really was a time of, now we would call it a digital detox, but really feeling like, who am I in relation to this world and nature and my family? And that was so formative for all of us and connecting us in, some common time and common experience, but also gave me lots of time to really strengthen who I believed I was and what I was all about.
Well, that is a blessing that you would have those experiences and this background with these parents who were treating you like human beings and helping you grow. Not everybody gets that.
Yeah, and the more then I stepped into my first career was teaching. So I taught high school English, and exploring writing and helping teenagers understand their ideas and their thoughts was amazing to me, because I realized what a different experience of life I had had as a child.
Yeah.
Because my parents did treat me so well. And I always had I remember when I was in high school, we had some of my older cousins who were in university would live with us for certain periods of time. And I could kind of look to them and see the decisions they were making. And as a young adult, I could think, I don't know that I would make that same decision. And so I was always, I kind of was allowed on the inside of many people's lives, and was always fascinated and curious to think about what was it that led them to make certain decisions.
Yeah. Me too.
And so that's been my lifetime curiosity. Uh-huh. What are the factors that lead us to make decisions? And now when I look back on my own childhood, what were the factors that led me to make certain decisions in my life? So that's been kind of a growing question. And I recently was thinking about when I first went to get my driver's license. My older brother had done it. It was super easy for him. And we both did well in school, so I thought, if he could do it, no problem. And I didn't do as much studying as I should have done, because I just thought, naturally, I should get this.
Right.
And I failed.
Uh-huh.
And I remember going home and punching my brother on the shoulder, like, how could you do this to me? So my easy response was to blame him.
Yeah, it's his fault.
Because clearly he had misguided me.
Yeah.
And then I remember just sitting on the couch crying and feeling miserable. And he was kind of laughing at me like, well, didn't you study? And I was like, not as much as I guess I should have.
Yeah.
And just feeling the humiliation of that, and realizing I had done it to myself, and I couldn't actually blame him for it. But it took me a very long time before I went back and did the learner's test. I passed, but I didn't drive on my own until I was 20.
Wow.
Because I was still working through who I believed I thought I was and how capable I thought I was to drive a vehicle. And it was painful because I felt like, no, I've had this one failure. I must be a failure in this area.
That's a lot to wait until you're 20 years old for that. And
and people around me are like, Dan, what's wrong with you? Like, why don't you just get your driver's license? And part of it was I didn't need to. I took transit, which was ecologically friendly, and I was happy about that. My friends had cars. So it wasn't an issue. I got around lots of other creative ways, but it was an avoidance strategy, so I wouldn't have to avoid the potential failure of not making it.
Yeah. So, something about this is what I find is that people who end up going into a line of work that's around trying to help other people come from two pretty distinct backgrounds. They either come from a real shitty home life where everything was terrible, and then thinking about it as an adult, they're kind of angry about it, and they want to try to help other people not to have to go through those same experiences. And then there are people like you who come from loving homes with parents who are supportive and have the resources to try to give them enrichment experiences and things like that. And sometimes when I write about parenting and I tell people to be kind to their kids and to be loving to their kids and to communicate with them, the kinds of things that you're talking about, there's some pushback that that's how you end up with someone who's spoiled. So did you end up being a spoiled kid, Deanne, or did you end up benefiting from those parents?
I was spoiled with love.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I really think sometimes, so here's another thing I've discovered is I talk a lot about loving your kids, but there isn't a parent out there, especially not a parent who's reaching out to a life coach or a parenting coach who's going to say it's a lack of love that's causing what's going on.
Yeah.
But really, when we can really give love, it's because we know what it feels like because we can give it to ourselves. So one of the really formative pieces of work for me is Marianne Williamson's A Return to Love. because whenever there is a block in the way we're trying to connect with our teens, there's often also a block in the way we're trying to connect with ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And so we feel like you could be spoiled because so much is given to you, but that's just about the material things.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think there's any spoiling a person from truly loving them and being present with them.
Yeah. But
that's really it. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's my take on spoiling.
Well, I guess the question underneath my question has to do with whether or not you experience some parents worried that if they carry out some of this philosophy that you're trying to encourage them to carry out, that they're going to end up somehow spoiling their kids by not being tough enough with them.
I think the concern is more like, where's the boundary then? Uh-huh. Like, how will I protect them and keep them safe?
Right.
Because it sounds like you're saying if I should be approving of them, it means everything they do is okay.
Uh-huh. Right. Good.
And that's absolutely not the case, because we can be present with someone and absolutely love them for who they are, and still ask those questions that you described earlier. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that? What would you do differently next time? And there's a lot of mistrust that will actually work with teens, because we feel like they're not good at making decisions. They're not good at assessing risks because of their brains, and all of that can be true. But there is something so powerful about having a relationship with an adult who's willing to ask those questions, where it really allows teens to stop and consider it. And that's exactly what we want.
Yeah. Yeah, great.
So to give a happy ending to that story I shared about my client, Sarah,
sure.
When she would come into the room, her daughter would leave.
Yes.
And those micro moments of working together so she could be that powerful present in her daughter's life and ask her daughter those questions instead of telling her what she ought to be doing that she wasn't. 5 months later, her daughter was sitting in the family room, sipping some tea, waiting for her mom to come home so they could connect.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And so a really beautiful kind of before and after of the shift that happened through those micro moments, because I mean, you know this, you have teenagers, that's all we've got sometimes with them, is those micro moments.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, just the other day I had my one son just said, like, hey, you want to go for a walk? Yes, I do. I dropped what I was doing and we went for a walk, and he just opened up about what was going on, and it wasn't necessarily deep, but the conversations don't always have to be deep. I think sometimes they just want to check in to make sure that they're more important to you than the paper that you're in the middle of grading or the email that you're in the middle of responding to. And so I agree. It's those little tiny moments where you get the opportunity to just put a little phrase out there that might impact them later on.
Yeah. And what a beautiful example, because you could see he's signaling, like, Dad, we need to connect. Uh-huh. It wasn't just about walking. It wasn't, you could see that it was so much bigger than that, what was at work there in that small moment.
So put this in a nutshell, if you could. If somebody said, look, Deanne, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to try to tell me what it is you've got to teach me. You hear the tone that I'm taking in my sarcastic voice.
Yeah.
If you've got like 15 to 30 seconds to try to give them the main message, what is it?
The more we can understand how to love ourselves, even though we're imperfect, that allows us to know exactly how to love and support our teens, because we can ask them those powerful questions. How do you feel about this? What would you do differently? How can I help you go get what you want to get and go where you want to go? Because I love you and I believe in you.
That's nice. Thanks so much for being on the show. Tell us how, if people wanted to reach out to you, find out more about what you're doing and some of the things that you have to offer, where would they find you?
Yeah, they can go to my website, www.gratitudework.com.
Gratitudework.com.
Or they can find me on Facebook, Deanne Barrett on Facebook.
Okay, how do you spell your name for everybody?
DeAnne Barrett.
All right. So I don't recall you really bringing up the word gratitude specifically in the conversation. So what's the connection between gratitude work and the stuff that we've been discussing?
Yeah, so as a high school teacher, so many of my teaching colleagues would say, oh, these high school students are so entitled.
Yeah.
So going back to what you had said about our parents worried they will spoil them. And part of that is the developmental stage that they're at, that many adolescents just, so much has been given to them as children, and now they're really starting to see how much will be given to me automatically and how much do I actually have to work at this, which is a really great adaptive strategy. But what I found also is that we have in the Western world, the people that I work with who can afford computers and cars.
Yeah.
There is so much that is available to us, and so much that we don't even have to think of because it's really kind of automatic. And when we're adults, we've created a lifestyle where we don't have to think about the necessities any longer. Mm-hmm. And we can become entitled as adults. And so one way to circumvent that is really to step into choosing gratitude.
Yeah.
And the reason is so that we can see what's right in front of us. Uh-huh. It's easy to complain about our husbands, or which some women do in their, connections of friends, or complain about our teenagers, or tell each other how hard the teenage stage is going to be. But if that's what we're saying, that's what we'll see, and that's what we'll find. But if we can instead be grateful, I'm so grateful that my son, even though he's difficult, is still living in my home. So I have another opportunity tomorrow to talk to him.
Yeah.
When we can direct ourselves that way, we see more opportunities. And I actually had a neuroscientist tell me that when we use gratitude, it actually opens up the same neural pathways as creative thinking, so we can see more options. And I love that science has kind of confirmed what wisdom traditions have known for a long time. Yeah. That when we can choose to be grateful for what we have, it actually expands.
Yeah, and I happen to know also that there's a lot of research that shows that the more you practice the skill of gratitude, the more empathy you develop for other people. Because you recognize what you have, and then when somebody else doesn't have that, you know how difficult that must be.
Love that.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to put this on the description of the show, because that quote there right at the end is fantastic. If that's what you're saying, that's what you'll see. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's that can go in either direction, right? If you're complaining,
absolutely.
Yeah, if you're complaining, you're going to see confirmation of your complaint, and if you're grateful, you're going to see more confirmations for why you should continue to be grateful. That's great.
And there's nothing more simple. Not that it's easy, but there's nothing more simple that can elevate the quality of your life as appreciating what you have in front of you.
Great. Hey, so thanks so much for being on the show. This has been an inspiring conversation. I'm glad to have you out there. And
thank you so much for having me, and to our listeners for taking the time to hang with us and be with us. I'm so grateful.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that's the end of our show for today. I'll be catching you next Friday. Thanks for listening. Reach out to me. Once again, info@drjohnrich.com. I'll leave you with the message that I said I give my kids, because this is really true for you. If you reach out and want to talk about anything, I am on your side. So, tune in next week. Thanks for tuning in this week. Bye.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a new
IPMNation.com.